Welcome to Ecopsychology Voices, an interview series with some of ecopsychology's luminaries, co-created by Linda Bizzell and myself. Hello, my name is Carol Koziel, and I am the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network, the host of this series. Today, Pegi Eyers will be having a conversation with Darcy Ottey about rites of passage, social justice, and ancestral recovery. Pegi Eyers, author of Ancient Spirit Rising, Reclaiming Your Roots and Restoring Earth Community, an award-winning book that also touches on many of the issues Darcy will be talking about, such as social justice, decolonization, eco-spirituality, the reconnection to ethnoculture for all peoples, and the ancestral arts. Pegi and Darcy, thank you so much for joining us, and the airwaves are yours.
Thank you, Carol. It's great to be here today. I'll tell you about Darcy, her full bio in just a moment, but I just wanted to say that Darcy's work and that of Youth Passageways has been really inspirational, hugely inspirational to me in terms of modeling how to work with others in collaboration, especially with groups that are from different backgrounds and ethnicities and cultures. So I've been helping out from time to time as an advisor with Youth Passageways, and I highly recommend having an in-depth look at the work they do at youthpassageways.org. The work in networking, community building, teaching, and publishing. There's a document that they produced, I think 3 years ago, entitled Cross-Cultural Protocols in Rites of Passage, Guiding Principles, Themes, and Inquiry. That document is available as a free download. I really highly recommend, taking a look at it, downloading it, accessing it. It's a really amazing model for what can be done in your own organization or practice. So today, Darcy is going to be talking about her own journey, the world of rites of passage, her ongoing work in social justice, and the importance of connecting to our ancestors. So I'll just read her bio straight up. Since her wilderness-based coming-of-age experience through Rites of Passage Journeys at age 13, Darcy Ottey has been dedicated to creating intentional rites of passage experiences to help young people mature into healthy, capable adults. As an initiated European-American woman of British-Ukrainian descent, she's particularly interested in how rites of passage can help develop both the individual capacities and the cultural will necessary to dismantle structures of oppression, as well as the role inheritors of race-based privilege can have in interrupting cycles of oppression that those structures cause, helping to allow for the creation of truly thriving communities. Currently the Stewardship Council Chair for Youth Passageways, Darcy has worked with a variety of youth-serving organizations as both Rite of Passage practitioner and administrator. She holds an MA in Environment and Community from Antioch University in Seattle. Darcy also teaches and leads workshops and intensives. She does TED Talks, and she's in the process of writing a soon-to-be-published book about her own journey to connect with her ancestors. On her website, which is www.darcy.com, she offers core services that are one-on-one mentorship, group teaching and facilitation, staff and volunteer training and development, ritual design and facilitation, and organizational development and counseling. So with that, Darcy, thank you for being here, and we're so excited to be part of this amazing space, and I'm opening it up to you right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Pegi, and thanks everyone for having me and for tuning in today. It's really an honor to be here with you all. So I'm going to begin with sharing my screen here. And I wanted to start with this image as I go into my sort of brief presentation before we open it up to questions. This is the Methow River, named after the Methow people. I live just a few hundred meters from this river. And as we begin, I just want to begin with gratitude to the Methow people that stewarded this land that I am blessed to live in since time immemorial, and who themselves were forcibly removed for the most part from this valley over to the other side of the mountains onto a reservation with 11 other nations, where they continue to persist and thrive and struggle and live today. And my hope is that this talk in some way will contribute to the restoration of right relations between the people in my community and the Metau Nation, and that may be true all around this continent that we share. I also want to begin by just naming a few of my teachers and ancestors and the folks whose shoulders this work that I've been blessed to follow over the course of my life, the sort of people who gave rise to it and from whom I've been able to learn. So to name a few of my ancestors: Sarah Northrup, Edith Hartshorn Wagoner, Katarzyna Kuzniak, Samuel Hartshorn. Just a few of the folks who struggled and lived and died that I could be where I am today. And then some of my teachers: Stan Crow, Gigi Coyle, Melissa Michaels, Paul Hill, David Blumenkrantz. And then some of my comrades: Kruti Parekh, Sobi Wing, Ramon Parrish. So the name of my talk is Tying the Threads of the Past to the Future: Rites of Passage, Social Justice, and Ancestral Recovery. And what I'm really going to do today is just share a little bit about my personal story that's led me to really be following these streams, tying these threads, weaving this tapestry of what is actually possible and what is needed in our communities at this time. And the place where that journey begins for me, as Peggy spoke to, was really in my coming of age experience when I was 13. So I was blessed to go out in the wilderness for 3 weeks with another small group of youth, and to really in a conscious, intentional rite of passage experience. And it was powerful and transformative for me. And I knew it at the time, and it just became more and more clear as I grew up how foundational that was for me in instilling a sense of confidence and belief in who I was, and a commitment to being a positive force in the world. And so at some point I realized that, like, oh, I was so blessed to have that experience when I was 13. It's really my responsibility to give it back to other folks. And I began following that in my late teens, early 20s, throughout my 20s, really looking for how can I bring rites of passage to my community. And I was also studying anthropology and sociology in school and following those lines, a little bit of psychology. And what became clear to me is what even a rite of passage is. There's many definitions, and people use this term a lot in a variety of ways in our world today. And for me, it's really important to be clear when we use a term what we're talking about. So a rite of passage is an intentional, meaningful marker of transition from one stage of life to the next. So intentional meaning that, we have lots of initiatory experiences in our life. Our life will initiate us. It's an innate impulse to change and to grow. But something can be a rite of passage when it's really, there's consciousness and intention brought to it. And then meaningful in the sense that it's not, that it actually has meaning for the individual that's undergoing it and for the community around them. So it's not just kind of a rote event that doesn't really change anything anymore, but there is a depth of meaning, and often with this comes testing and challenge. And then really this, one stage of life to the next. So rite of passage being, from a birth, coming into the world as a rite of passage, death as a huge rite of passage that we go through, and then through the various life stages, as in from childhood to adulthood through adolescence, or from adulthood into elderhood as folks grow older, or a marriage, or some sort of coming together is another type of rite of passage as well. And as I studied myself, and I also was working with others and looking at what Rites of Passage brought to them, particularly with youth, but with adults as well. What became clear to me is that there were kind of three major gifts that came forward through creating these kind of intentional, meaningful Rite of Passage experiences. One is that they instill a deep sense of belonging. So folks have a place in the community and know their place in the community. And without these transitions, it can get really nebulous. And folks don't have a clear sense of who they belong to and where they belong. And they also provide just creating conscious Rite of Passage experiences creates a roadmap for how we navigate transitions in our future. So I talk about it as like transition literacy, that it's a very specific set of skills and tools that are needed to gracefully navigate transitions. And so when folks are offered the frame of a Rite of Passage or intentional Rite of Passage experiences, then they have this template that they can apply for any transition they go through in the future. And then finally, you know, one of the hallmarks of a Rite of Passage and also one of the gifts is that they really help someone to uncover and celebrate and honor, make sense of their unique gifts that they have to bring to the community. A sense of purpose, a sense of this is how I fit in a way that nobody else could. So I followed this thread of Rites of Passage and was, you know, very clear that this was my work in the world. And in my late 20s, I was director of Rite of Passage Journeys, the program I had done for myself as a youth. And in that role, I was blessed 10 years ago to find myself on the big island of Hawaii at a gathering called Global Passageways. And it was a gathering of about a little bit more than 100 traditional cultural practitioners, cultural visionaries, writers, artists, Rite of Passage practitioners. It was definitely the most cross-cultural, diverse group of people I'd ever been part of. Very intergenerational, very cross-disciplinary, all coming together around this question of how do we support our youth in their transition into adulthood, especially at this moment where we're undergoing such massive transition as a species and a planet. And the gathering was amazing, and it also came to a standstill due to cross-cultural conflict. And basically, a lot of it was around how to show up in a good way as guests to our Indigenous hosts, and then also how different cultural expectations or understanding around time as some of the kind of key themes that created this standstill. And it was my first time being in a massive cross-cultural fire and seeing what that was like. I was powerfully humbled. I was also in a room with all these luminaries from the field of Rites of Passage that were like, I was tongue-tied to be around, and elders, and I realized at that point, like, wow, I need spaces like this, because my picture of what a Rite of Passage was about this big before that, having had my own initiatory experience. And being with traditional Indigenous cultural practitioners and, you know, Paul Hill, who does Afrocentric Rites of Passage in Cleveland, Ohio, and, you know, community organizers in Los Angeles and in the Bay Area, I just began to see like the picture of Rites of Passage is much bigger than I thought, and I need access to, in order to serve my community the most effectively, I need access to this like broad diversity of perspectives. And if I'm gonna have access to that, then I better figure out how to conduct myself as a, you know, cisgendered, so, you know, identifying as the same gender that I was assigned at birth, female, a cisgendered white woman, you know, middle class from Seattle. There were a lot of things that I needed to know to show up in those spaces in a good way and not perpetuate harm unconsciously, and just to have the inner strength to be in the midst of that conflict as well. And so that gathering really sort of spurred in me this awareness that I needed to really immerse myself in the work of social justice, that I had a particular role with the privileges that I had. I was able to access a lot of resources that other people couldn't. And being in that diverse situation, seeing the struggles that other people had made me really realize, like, I have some responsibility here. All people should have access to health, wealth, well-being, justice, and opportunity. This is really foundational, and somehow this connects with rites of passage. And I'm just going to follow that thread. And so I began following that thread, you know, again, about 10 years ago, really figuring out how does this apply to my community. And that led me more and more deeply into Youth Passageways, which grew out of the Global Passageways gathering over a period about 5 years. And as I got more deeply connected with this network, which, you know, at first was like, forget it, we're not even going to bother to try to get along. But then realizing, like, in order to meet, like, in order to bring rites of passage back out into the world, we really do have to find ways to come together. And really seeing that one of those ways was around understanding for each of us what our ancestral inheritance is. So this led me to follow this line of ancestral recovery. And so ancestral recovery, so this is, you know, the definition that I'm working with right now, a multi-generational process whereby those long disconnected from their ancestral stories and traditions regain a relationship with their ancestors, including both the healthy aspects and the wounded aspects, as part of restoring health to ourselves, our lineages, and our communities. And so I use this term recovery, ancestral recovery, really intentionally. One, the root of that word means to regain health or consciousness. So that feels like the right word. And then also for me, it connects with 12-step recovery. And I see ancestral recovery as actually a very similar process to the process of recognizing that our lives have become unmanageable as, you know, Western civilization. And that in fact, there are powers beyond ourselves as humans that can restore us to sanity, is, you know, the language of 12-step work. And so for me, part of that, you know, power greater is the power of the ancestors and what it is to partner with them. And then the process of the steps of really taking moral inventory of here is where my own selfish needs or our own selfish needs have had costs at the expense of other people's and other beings on the planet that we share, and then making amends and figuring out what it is to make amends. And so this is actually how I connected with Pegi's work, is very much from following this thread of ancestral recovery and realizing, like, oh, wow, it's not, you know, my rite of passage when I was 13, I see now, had very culturally appropriative elements. There were things that were taken from other cultures and given to me as this young, you know, this 13-year-old white girl that became my spiritual foundation, and where I was really initiated. And then, you know, a couple decades later, I realized, like, oh, that's problematic. Like, people don't want me to be using those traditions. But then that's where I feel my spiritual grounding, and that's very confusing. And I don't want to perpetuate that for other young people. So realizing, like, oh, wow, there are actually, if I go back, I can see that there are earth-cherishing traditions, cultural forms, rites of passage that my ancestors practiced way long ago. And so following these threads really led to kind of two key questions that for me bring them all together. And the first is a question framed by my colleague Sobi Wing, who's the chair of the Cross-Cultural Protocols Working Group. And I would say he's like someone I follow as like he's, I feel like, always setting like a kind of new bar of where to go with this work. And, you know, in the world of rites of passage, we talk a lot about how rites of passage are largely missing in dominant culture, why they're missing, or like that they're missing, and what the consequences of them being not available are, but rarely do we ask the question of why. And so I found this to be a very fruitful personal inquiry of exploring the question of why do we lack access to the cultural traditions that our ancestors developed over millennia, right? And they've been lost really for a very short time in the scale of human life. And not even completely lost, just driven underground largely. And then the other question is, and this is where it's tying the threads of the past to the future, what sort of traditions do we want to leave as our legacy for the young thousands of years from now? And what needs to be done to make that possible? So I would say these two questions at this point kind of guide my work. And what I'm gonna open it up to questions here shortly, but before I do, I wanna just offer a few, like, okay, so that's all very big picture, broad brush, conceptual piece. So what are some practical things that folks can do for yourselves and with your clients to sort of begin to weave these threads together? So the first thing is to explore our multifaceted ancestral inheritances. So there's two things that I want to say about this. One is just like when I began my ancestral recovery journey, I didn't even know the names of all my grandparents. You know, family was not something that we really talked about a whole lot when I was growing up. And that sense of lineage and tradition, I know sort of firsthand what it is to come to that from not much. And I also know that the richness that can come from really exploring lineage as a journey, not a destination, as a pathway. And I think of it like a spiral where I'm just kind of moving around the terrain and inviting more and more and more to come forwards. And knowing that it's like in the tech world, it's very easy to access lots of information all the time, like way too much for us to take in. And one of the things I actually love about ancestral work is that it teaches us that we have to go slow because we can only metabolize so much of our ancestral histories at once. And the information can really come in drips and drabs, and something that I didn't even notice as a detail, you know, 2 years ago, suddenly I see it and I'm like, oh, now that's the piece I needed to make that story make sense. So just invite folks to start kind of wherever they're at and really call on your ancestors. Like, they want to be remembered. I believe they want to be remembered. And so it's like, if you show interest and wanting to partner with them, they will bring you the wisdom that they have to share. So that's one piece. Another is to honor the seasons and cycles of our lives now and of the world around us. And again, just beginning where you are, starting small and simple. And for me, part of this is about calling together community to be around us as we face transition. So like last year, it was time for me to mark something, to go out on the land and to let some things be put down and pick some other things up. And I called together a group of women 20, 30 years older that live here in my community that I didn't even really know that well. But I just asked them if they would want to be my aunties and listen to me share why I was going out before I did, and then listen to me share when I came back. And that's led to this like seasonal aunties circle that, you know, I feel like they're doing it all for me, but then at the end of it, they're like, oh, thank you so much, you know, for letting me talk to them about what I'm going through. And I think that for me, that's such an example of when we invite others into and just say, hey, I need some witnessing as I'm navigating this transition. Folks are hungry for opportunities to do that. Another thing we can do is really study and work to understand our own social positions, those kind of aspects of our upbringing, our experience, our identity that give us access to certain things and make other things more difficult. And from that, learn about where we are poised to have unique influence. When I was working at Rite of Passage Journeys, you know, one of the things that we would often talk about is like, oh, we need to serve more underserved youth, whatever underserved means. And just coming through some of my experiences to realize that the youth of similar backgrounds to me were the ones that, or, you know, and now the adults with similar backgrounds to me are the ones that I can relate to the most, and therefore be of the most benefit, I think. In some ways. And in other ways, it's important to reach out and to learn about and take action for justice for the most vulnerable and marginalized members of our communities. And just recognizing, for me, it's really important, like the confidence, the energy, the health that can come from action, and is a really important part of the process as well. And when I talk about the most vulnerable and marginalized members of our communities, again, definitely the humans, but also the more than human beings that are incredibly vulnerable that we share this planet with. And then finally, I have really learned, and this is why I was so excited to come and talk with you all today, you know, as a network of folks building with other people and other movements to help restore health and justice. I really see the importance of us coming together, learning from one another, and sharing. So with that, as Peggy mentioned, just wanting to end with the way to get in touch with Youth Passageways. And so much of what I have learned has come from the work of this kind of wild group of people coming together, committed to sort of being in the fires together on behalf of our young people and future generations. So encourage folks to check out Youth Passageways. And I think with that, I'll stop and I'll pass it back to you, Peggy.
Great, thank you, Darcy. That was amazing. I do have a question or a line of inquiry myself, and then we'll open it up to any other questions or comments that anyone